Is Eyler. I'm a sophomore mechanical engineering student here at Robert Morris, and today I'll be presenting to you on collective guilt in the German culture since 1945. And just some background on why I chose to do this topic. Like I think of in the US, we're very proud of our nation. We have dedicated holidays to being proud of being Americans. You always see people wearing proud of the USA shirt, but like I think of my father and my sister both traveled abroad to Germany, and it's not the case there. Being proud of your nation is rather taboo, actually. So which has prompted me to want to look into like the origins and how it still came about today. And in Germany, they also tend to avoid the topic of the Holocaust and World War II. It's something they don't bring up, and I want to look into why that is. And the first thing, this is just a rundown of the topics I'm going to cover. The first thing we're going to look into is the origins and how it is transferred through the generations. Next, we're going to look at its effect on the German culture as a whole. And lastly, we'll talk about how it's hindered intercultural relations both within the country and on the world stage, how Germany interacts with other nations. Just some historical background, make sure we're on the same page. The Nazi Party came to power in the 1930s in Germany based on nationalism, and they're also experts at propaganda, having really huge rallies and being able to disseminate false information to lead to better their cause. And this was in a time whenever Germany was in a bad state, and someone coming to power who was saying Germans are better than everyone else really resonated with them, because it was very poor in the country due to the Treaty of Versailles after World War I. So, and as I'm sure everyone is familiar with, they committed the Holocaust, where they put millions of people to death based strictly on their religious, political, or ethnic background. And that's why I'm going to start with guilt transmission. After the war, Germany was in a bad state. They didn't have a government, so occupation soldiers came in. And in some towns, the occupation soldiers would post posters like this in the town square. And it says, "Diese Schandtaten eure Schuld," which in English means, "These atrocities, your fault." And you can imagine the psychological impact of seeing these horrible pictures of people piled up and super skinny because they weren't being fed. You can imagine what you'd think if you saw that poster, even if you had nothing to do with the concentration camps or the Nazi Party. And why were all the Germans held responsible? Because when you think about it, a low percentage of Germans actually perpetrated the Holocaust, since they were members of the Nazi Party, men and women who worked in concentration camps. But I found some research that it has something to do with the way the Nazis picked out their victims. See, they didn't pick people based on what they did. Say, they didn't put to death all the murderers or the rapists, they just picked out people based on being Jewish, being a gypsy, being a communist. So therefore, the guilt goes back onto all Germans, not just the people who perpetrated the crimes, which I thought was interesting. And why does it continue to transcend through the generations? And this is believed to be because of the unexplainable, unforgivable nature of the crime. You can't apologize for genocide. It's not something that can be resolved. So therefore, it just passes on to the next generation and just continues to be a part of the culture. And next we're talking about the effect on the culture itself. And in Germany after the war was pretty much laid flat in many different areas. Therefore, it was not a good time to be a German, and especially in the eastern part of Germany, for the German army committed some bad things whenever they invaded the Soviet Union. Therefore, the Soviet soldiers took that back out on the populace of Germany. And many people were raped, many people were killed. Huge tracts of Germany were just cut off, and people were forced to leave their homes they've lived in for years, and thousands of people died. And whereas the Allies can seek reparations for what the Germans committed in the war, the Germans just had to take these crimes with no justice. So I believe that not being able to seek justice against people who say raped you or killed your family members, that left a scar on the culture of Germany. And in the post-war years, there's two schools of thought in regards to guilt, and I'll be examining it through some popular authors in the country. And the first school being of remembrance and guilt, and a very famous author in Germany, Günter Grass, he actually won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1999, had the stance that Germans need to have an active engagement with their history and their guilt in order to, I guess, make up for what they did. And he represents more of the old school. He was born during, I believe he was a young boy during the war, so he wasn't guilty of anything, but he was alive whenever the crimes occurred. And the new school method is another author representing it, is F.C. Delius. He wrote a book called Die Flatterzunge. And in this book, His main character represented the generations of Germans born post-war, and throughout this novel, the main character would see things that, like such as a monument to the war or things like that, he'd see them as, and also a way people interact with their past, avoiding it. He saw that as hindrances to the country growing culturally and as a nation. And that represents more the new school in the country. Another interesting bit of research I pulled up was a flag study conducted between University of Philipps Marburg and Morehead State University. That's a German college and a US college. And they give these people these surveys, and at the end of the survey, they'd have just a flag for their respective nation. And they'd ask, what feelings do you get when you look at the flag? And the US results were what you'd kind of expect: freedom, courage, liberty, moral beliefs that we have as Americans. But for Germans, the results were different. The number one result was related to the national football team, actually. And the second largest response had something to do with the Third Reich, such as Adolf Hitler. People put Adolf Hitler, the Holocaust, stuff like that. And bear in mind, the German flag today has no resemblance to the German flag that flew during World War II. They adopted an entirely new flag after the war. So it's interesting to see how people, even 70 years later, still look at their flag of the nation that's entirely different and still see Hitler, Goebbels, and Himmler. And next we'll be looking at the intercultural consequences. Another interesting bit I saw was from the psychiatrist Carl Jung. We tend to look at the Holocaust from a European or American's perspective as a German crime, but what he looked at was from the lens of someone, say, in Asia. It's a consequence of European civilization. It has kind of stained the way Europeans are viewed in the world since then. And after the war, there weren't really men of working age after the war because they all kind of died or remained in the war, such that by the end, the men serving in the army were either young boys in their teens or men in their 60s. So obviously after the war, there was no workforce. So many different migrant workers came to the country, particularly from Turkey. And a bit of the issue in the country in the current day and previous decades is that they haven't really assimilated into the culture very well. I believe that could be a consequence of the guilt culture. Because as a Turkish parent, why would you want your child to merge into this society that is so stigmatized in the world? And as, say, a German, on the German side, why would you want, you're kind of like in defense mode and you don't want to give up any of your cultural history or traditions because you feel like it's being destroyed by everyone piling it on you. So I believe that had a role in the tensions between Turkish or other minorities in Germany. Okay. And to just go over some of the stuff I committed. The crimes committed by the Germans were the Holocaust, and the reason it transferred through the centuries were due to the nature of the crimes, the racial profiling, and the fact that you can't apologize for something on that scale. Also, I looked at how guilt has touched the culture, such as the way they view even just themselves as Germans, such as the flag study and how different people have had to take on it. And also, like I said, they looked at how intercultural relations were affected, such as how Germany reacts with other countries. They have a strong relationship with Israel, actually, but it took until 1965 for them to have any diplomatic relationship at all, obviously due to the Holocaust. And also how minorities within Germany are not being assimilated and how there's tensions between the two of them. One more. And it's my own personal belief that you cannot avoid the crimes of the past. Like, they don't talk about the Holocaust so much in Germany, they don't bring it up. Swastikas are literally illegal in the country, which makes sense. But at the same time, I believe you need to have an active engagement with your past in order to move forward into the future. So even though the people in Germany, the vast majority of the people in Germany today weren't even alive during the war or had no involvement in the war, they can still look at what their ancestors did and as a learning opportunity rather than a thing of shame. So my references, and thank you for listening. I'll take any questions.